Well, we've been working through Sabbath and looking at Sabbath as a resistance, as a bit of uh, a countercultural way to live, a countercultural way to think. And I used this book, Sabbath as Resistance by Walter Brueggemann. It's a small book. I'm willing to lend it out if you want to use it, or you could order it. It's very reasonably priced. But it's a great little book that challenges us to engage with the idea of Sabbath. Sabbath meaning rest. It just is a word for rest. And, you know, I've struggled with some of this stuff too. Like, it's not an easy thing to do to practice Sabbath. Last week, we talked a little bit about the system that's in place. And even before that, you know, in the fall, we looked at some things in the sermon series when we were talking about emotionally healthy discipleship. We looked at some things like embracing God's gift of limits. To come to that idea of realizing that I'm a human being, I have limits. My body has limits, my mind has limits, my physical energy has limits, and that's a reality, and it's not bad. And you are not less than for having limits. To actually see them as God's gift, as something that can set boundaries, or we can set boundaries on because we have those natural limits. God has made us human. If He didn't want us to be human, He wouldn't have made us human. We would be a superhero. And as of yet, I have not met any of them. We also talked about that idea of being before doing, of recognizing that really our internal life is very important, that we're easily caught up into activity and busyness, and maybe even especially in ministry, it's a dangerous thing because it's my job to be religious. Like, it's my job to be godly. And so I can get really busy caring for people and doing all these things and telling everybody else about God, but if I'm not careful and I don't take time with God, then I am quickly giving out of an empty well. And the same goes for you, in your job, in your life. How are you living for Christ in whatever it is He's called you to do? And if we're not careful, and if we're not prioritizing, or if we get distracted into the doing before being, we can think we're doing so much for God, but we're really running on empty. But in the last couple of weeks, we looked at the examples of rest that we found in the Old Testament particularly. We've seen God's example from creation. On the seventh day, God rested. He said, "It is good," and He took a break. God wasn't tired, but He rested as an example. God gave a mandate to rest to His people. And it became a distinctive. When they were in the desert, He told them to collect the food on the 6 days, and on the seventh day there would be no food. You were to collect it on the 6th, and that would cover you for the next day. And if you tried to get greedy on any of the other days, that food would rot by the next morning. So it didn't do any good for anybody to be greedy and overreach. He was giving them their daily bread. And it was a distinctive of people who trust Him. God gave them the commandments to keep the Sabbath, to keep it as a day of rest. Again, it became a distinctive from the people around them. They were different. They were called to be set apart. And that's part of what the Sabbath did. It was an indicator of that everyone else is part of a system, and we talked about that. Everyone else is pursuing and kind of caught up in this system, and it's as old as the earth itself, pretty much. That there's this otherworldly system. Oh, it's really the system of this world that beats the drum. You are not enough. You are not enough. And that's the constant underlying thrumming, this drumbeat that underlays all of society, all of advertising. Even the wonderful Super Bowl commercials that we'll watch tonight that'll make us laugh. And they usually mock that. You know, you're really not having a good time if you're not eating Doritos, you know. Whatever it is, but that's the whole message of society. And you hear it from every single angle that we begin to believe it, because it's sort of the air we breathe. And I'm calling us back to say, wait, we find a different system that God has presented to His people for thousands of years to call them out and say, no, there's a different way. There's a different way. There's a way, there's my way. And in my way there is rest. In my way there is trust. It's not easy, but God would contradict these messages. I named it last week the relentless restlessness. The relentless restlessness that undermines everything. It's part of why the discipline of silence is so difficult for many of us. That it's really hard to actually sit in silence. And then on top of that, perhaps by yourself in solitude. Now, I would say some of our seniors have learned this by choice or by chance. And it's a very valuable lesson. It's not really the phase of life of the young parent. It's pretty hard to find that. I'm calling myself young in that category, or a parent of young children, maybe I'll be more accurate. But it's difficult to find silence and solitude. But really, that's where we find God. I've been listening to a song almost every morning from a guy named Paul Zach. And the song is called Our God is the Friend of Silence. It's just this quiet little song. It's so much that my phone just brings it up every morning at 6:30. It's like, hey, do you want to play this again? That's scary for its own reason, but I say, yes, I do. It's just a little simple tune. Our God is the friend of silence. And I particularly love it when I get that 5 minutes before my kids are up. There's just this reminder that God is there. He's kind of sitting there waiting for us sometimes, but Caleb's crying. I only had 1 minute today. It wasn't, 30 seconds. I creep past his room, hoping to get just a couple of minutes. But we've talked about the system, right? Last week, that's kind of what we explored is this worldly system and what it creates. So today I want to just explore a few more things, again, that Brueggemann talked about in the book, of things that this system creates. It creates anxiety. This system creates anxiety. I cannot remember in my adult life a time that anxiety was this high, other than perhaps right after 9/11. But I wasn't much of an adult at that time. I was early 20s and, it wasn't quite the same. But man, anxiety is high. Society right now just is carrying a high level of anxiety. The news, all of the decisions you have to make about life, masking, attending this, mandates, political stuff, all of the protests, all of these things going on north of the border, south of the border, the Ukraine and Russia. You're probably I'm raising your blood pressure right now, so I'll stop. But there's no doubt that anxiety is very high. But the world is operating on a number of assumptions that we don't have to operate on. Okay? Anxiety, and this is the description I use, and I've read it elsewhere too. Anxiety is fear without a place to land. Okay? Anxiety is fear without a place to land. So when you're afraid of something, I have this coming up. I don't like that because I'm afraid of that. I'm afraid of what will happen when I do this or when I don't do this. I'm afraid of the dentist. I'm afraid of heights. I know exactly what it is, and I don't want to go up there because I'm afraid of heights. Thank you very much. That is fear. It's actually quite a bit simpler, and you can deal with it. You either overcome it and say, I will go up there to that high place and overcome the fear, or I will just stay away from high places, and I'm fine. Anxiety is much more difficult because it flutters around in the back of our minds and kind of around, but it doesn't land. And so you're like, I'm afraid, but I'm not quite sure of what. And I don't know when it's coming. And I don't know what it will look like. And I don't know what I should do about it. And then it just sits on us and it hinders us. And then we get reactive. And we get impulsive. And we get defensive. Do we see any of that around? We grasp for handles. We want someone to save us. We want some leader. We want some rule. We want something to change so we can hang on to it. And we will give up a lot of control for that. Right? When we look in the Old Testament, there's, when the Israelites are wandering through the wilderness, Moses goes up to the mountain to meet with God, and they all get scared. Like within a few days. Maybe he was up there for 40 days. But like Moses is gone and they're like, Aaron, your brother's gone. He just ditched us. We don't know what's going to happen. We need to have something to worship. What are we going to do? God has left us here. Moses has left us. What are we going to do? And Aaron, with his brilliant idea, says, bring all your gold and we'll make an idol. So at least we have something to worship. Because the whole nation is so anxious and doesn't know what's going to happen next that we look for gods, small g gods, as he points out. And we hang on to things. And so they bring all the gold. Aaron makes an idol. They began to worship this golden calf. They brought the gold. They watched Aaron make it. And now they're bowing down to this thing. This is what people did, I guess. And so they wanted to be like the other nations. Even though the God of the universe had just led them out of Egypt, shown them the 10 plagues, opened the Red Sea, took care of Pharaoh's army, has been providing their daily bread. Somehow also, by the way, their shoes didn't wear out and their clothes didn't wear out. Another little miracle that isn't mentioned very much. So God's done all of this, and 40 days is all it took, and they're all like, what are we going to do? We better make an idol, so then we won't be so anxious. And we do this. We look for things to grab onto, or people, or leaders, or characters. And we think, I don't want to sit with this feeling because I don't like it. Sometimes it's really tricky because we can kind of Christianize it. So when I was a chaplain at a hospital, this is one of the hard lessons I had to learn. When I was a chaplain at the hospital, I would pray for people a lot, and that was great. Like, it was enjoyable, and it was nice and meaningful to be able to minister to people. But one of the things that I learned about myself in that is, and my supervisor would challenge me on, was to say, were you praying for that person because they wanted it? Or were you praying for that person because you were uncomfortable with their pain? You're like, can it be both? I'm like, sure, but man, I realized that sometimes I used prayer as a way to make me feel better. I didn't like sitting in the room with somebody who had a terminal illness and I couldn't fix it. And I didn't know what to say to them because death was imminent within a few days. And then it's just really awkward. And what do you say? And so kind of try to listen a little bit, and then like, well, how can I pray for you? And like that's when my anxiety gets high enough, that's my out. I'll pray for you. I'm feeling really uncomfortable right now with the fact that you're dying in front of me, so how can I pray for you? I want to leave. So even prayer was one of my, in that, and it's hard, you're like, wow, and I didn't know I was doing that. We don't like to sit in anxiety. We don't like to sit in the tension. It's hard. It's really hard. It takes strength and character. But when we're at peace, we can locate ourselves in God's rest. One of the things that I've been reminded of too is that reminder that when we entered into a room in the hospital, that we weren't bringing Jesus. We weren't bringing God to the patient. God was already at work. God is already at work. We just join Him. God is already at work where you work. Some of you work in the hospital, in the warehouse, wherever. God is already at work. We join God. That helps to bring down the anxiety a little bit. Okay, God's already here. He's not absent. I want to read for you from Matthew chapter 6, 24 and 27. Okay, 24 says, "No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you'll be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money." So they kind of identify this tension between systems, right? Mammon, money, pursuit of wealth is one. The other is serving God. He goes on right after that, because that creates tension, right? "Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body or what you will wear. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothes? Look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap or store away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they? Can any one of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your life?" And then I skip down to 33. "But seek first His kingdom and His righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well." That's the Heavenly Father. Seek the Heavenly Father's kingdom and His righteousness. So there's this acknowledgement of anxiety. Jesus knows it's there. He knows that people carry this. We still carry it. He said, hey, don't worry. Trust me. When you serve God, I got you. Moving on, exclusivity is our next one. So anxiety is sort of the first thing that comes from this system. The second thing is exclusivity. This worldly system that we're a part of, it creates division. It's all around us. It creates hate. It creates haves and the have-nots. It creates people who get access to helpful systems and people who don't have access. Because this system is about pursuing wealth. It's about pursuing what you can get as much as you can, pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, doing whatever you can to get as far ahead as you can, and furthering your own agenda. This is kind of the common pursuit in our world, but it creates a system of exclusivity. It insiders and outsiders. People who are the upper crust. People who you want to be with or who don't. Losers. What? Do you think God has ever referred to anybody as a loser? A fool, perhaps, for those who don't acknowledge God. That's clear in the Old Testament. But God doesn't call anybody a loser. And so in this system of rest, we have this equalizing of status. And that's found in Deuteronomy chapter 5. I'm going to read, this is where Moses summons Israel together again and revisits the commandments, revisits the covenant. So I'm going to read to you from Deuteronomy verses 12 to 15. Chapter 5, verse 12 to 15. "Observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy, as the Lord your God has commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter," which is your children, "nor your male nor female servant," so neither gender of servant, "nor your ox or donkey or any of your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns, so that your male and female servants may rest as you do. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and that the Lord your God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore the Lord your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day. So there's this great equalization there, where God is instructing the society that He's forming to say, look, on the Sabbath, everybody gets rest. Everybody. The haves and the have-nots. The peasants and the kings. The people who are your servants and you and your children and your animals. Even the animals get a break. So there's like equalization. The foreigners, the aliens, all of them get rest. If anybody lives within your borders, Sabbath means rest. You don't have to look like me. You don't have to talk like me. You don't have to smell like me. You don't have to it's rest for everybody. So there's this exclusivity is just diminished. All of a sudden, everybody's equal in the eyes of God, which we believe, don't we? Sabbath, rest, reinforces this idea that all, in God's eyes, all are worthy and deserving and needing rest. The author notes, on the Sabbath, you do not have to do more. You do not have to sell more. You do not have to control more. You do not have to know more. You do not have to have your kids in ballet or in soccer or in hockey. You do not have to be younger or more beautiful. You do not have to score more, because this one day breaks the pattern of coercion, and all are like you, equal. Equal worth, equal value, equal access, equal rest. You're free to be neighbors when you're not trying to keep up with the Joneses. When you're not competing with someone in your neighborhood, you're free to be their neighbor. They're not the competition. Brueggemann goes on to say, those who remember and keep the Sabbath find they are less driven, less coerced, less frantic to meet deadlines, and free to be rather than to do. And I wanted to read a little passage from Isaiah. Here's an invitation from the Lord. Isaiah 55, 1 and 2. Come, all you who are thirsty. Come to the waters. And you who have no money, come, buy and eat. Come buy wine and milk without money and without cost. Why spend money on what is not bread and your labor on what does not satisfy? Listen to me and eat what is good, and you will find delight in the richest fare. He talks on about listening, coming to the Lord. But isn't this a wonderful invitation? Come all. Come one, come all. Come and buy and eat. You don't need money. Your money is no good here. You just come and ask. That's our generous God. Then the last issue that this system creates is multitasking. And he identifies that in there too. Multitasking. He shared a story of when he was growing up. His dad was a pastor, and the town grocer, there was one grocery store in their little rural town, and the town grocer was part of their church. But every week, before the end of the service, the town grocer was monitoring the watch and would get up about 5 minutes before the service was done from the front row, or up in the front, and would leave and walk out and walk, old church building, one aisle down the middle, would get up and walk down the middle with his wife on out the door, causing an interruption for everyone while the preacher's in the middle of preaching. Because the town grocer knew that the other Lutheran church in town got out earlier, and he needed to get to the grocery store to be able to open up so that he could get those good Lutheran customers coming through. And multitasking. Can you imagine? You're like sitting there, okay, Well, I don't care where the preacher's at. I got to go and open up my store because I don't want to miss those. So then, are you really listening? Are you really engaged? Are you letting the Spirit of God speak to you? And I like what he said, Brueggemann said, multitasking is the drive to be more than we are, to control more than we do, and to extend our power and our effectiveness. I'll read that again. Multitasking is the drive to be more than we are, to control more than we do, and to extend our power and our effectiveness. It has this appearance of rest, or like, I'm going to try to do 5 things at once because I want to be able to rest. But really, we kind of end up giving less than 1/5 of ourselves to all 5 things. And we're somewhere else in our mind. Now, what parent hasn't done this with their children, where they come and talk to you or they show you something and you're on your phone, right? It could be perfectly legitimate. It's a work thing, right? I need to take this call. I need to check this email. I need to text this person back or whatever it is, right? And we've all felt that like, yeah, that's very nice, honey, Or you're trying to like engage and still, yeah, no, that's great coloring and you're, yeah. Maybe even with our spouses. Yeah. Yeah. Man, smartphones, beautiful, horrible things, aren't they? It gives us a license to ignore people. But this multitasking, it's really an indicator of restlessness. And if we really want to give a special gift to someone, give them presence. I don't mean with a T, I mean with a C. Give them your presence. Be present with them. Look them in the eye. Listen attentively. Reflect back to them what you've heard them say. Give them attention. The gift of your presence is so powerful. People will want to be around you. It may even be an indicator of our own divided heart when we're trying to do too many things at once. Or maybe we haven't really learned that gift of limits. Now, again, some of you have jobs that do require multitasking. This isn't a finger wave or trying to get you to feel guilty or bad about yourselves. But we do need to ask ourselves, is this multitasking really necessary right now? Is it dividing me? And so, transition. What do you want us to do about this, Pastor? What are you saying about all this stuff? This is the worldly system, and it causes anxiety and exclusivity, multitasking. Yeah, you're right. So what? What do I do? Are you saying we need to come back to Sundays being our Sabbath? Do we need to be like the Jewish people and go from Friday night to Saturday night, sundown to sundown, where we don't do anything? What do we do with this information? How do we find this rest? Well, Sabbath, rest that God intended, it should counteract these things, right? Like the rest that God is calling us into, it should not create anxiety in us. It should not create an exclusivism in us. It shouldn't call us to multitask our way through it. So here's what you need to know. The secret to good rest is preparation. The secret to good rest is preparation. This was life-changing for me when I'm not great at it all the time, but somebody pointed it out to me, like the idea of Sabbath, even in the Bible, it always took preparation. So when they're wandering in the desert and getting the food every day, they have to collect it on the 6th for the 7th day. When God puts it into the law and they have to prepare on the Sabbath, so that Friday night, when they would hold up a black hair against the night sky, if you couldn't see it, Sabbath is on. If you hadn't finished, you drop it. Do not work at all after that. That's when Sabbath is on. So you got to prepare. You got to clean the house. You got to make the food. You got to get things ready for rest. Now, we don't think of that. We just think of rest as stopping work. I worked really hard. Now I'm tired. I'm going to rest. And you stop what you were doing. That's part of it. But we all know that when you get to the end of the week, we're ordering pizza on Friday night because we just stopped work and we're exhausted and we need something to eat. But good rest, the secret of good rest is preparation. And so they prepared in the desert with food. The 10 Commandments required it on Friday before sundown. And here's the real kicker. In the Sabbath year, when the 7th year would come around, people had to collect enough harvest in the 6th year to cover the 6th year, the 7th year, and the 8th year. So that's a lot of preparation, isn't it? Where are you going to store the grain? What are you going to do for this? Because it's the 6th year, we've got to collect enough to sustain us essentially for 3 years, at least 2.5. So that takes some preparation. Now God said, I'm faithful. I'll provide for you. But in essence, you've got to do the work to prepare. So, what does that look like? We need to prepare internally and we need to prepare externally. Internally, we have to kind of wrestle with what preparation is needed for your mind or your soul to rest. There's times, and oftentimes, Saturday nights, I don't sleep great because Sunday's coming. So I've thought about the sermon. I've been wrestling with the sermon. I usually have some great ideas about 3 or 4 a.m. And so I grab my phone and I type them out or I write them on a piece of paper. My brain is not really resting because today I have work. This is a big job. Every week I have a presentation to give. Sunday afternoon I rest. My mind is done and I can rest. So we have to say, what preparation does my mind or my soul need to rest? What needs to be resolved? Is there conflict with somebody in my life, with a spouse or a child or someone else that needs to be resolved before I can rest? I want to encourage you, and this is challenging for many of us, to nurture a growing awareness of your feelings. What am I feeling internally? And I would even say, what is going on in my body? What is going on in my body? We men particularly are not always very good at this. I'll say it generously. But where does stress go? Where does your stress show up? Okay, we know that stress shows up in your body. Where? Where does it show up for you? Is it in your shoulders? Is it in your neck? Is it in your gut? Do you get headaches? Where does stress show up for you? And you just need to know yourself. Everybody's different. But then this oftentimes is an indicator that you probably need a rest. We're telling some of our kids, we're saying, you need to listen to your body when it's time to go potty. Right? Listen to your body. Is it saying you need to go to the bathroom? Listen to your body. Is it saying you need a rest? No, I'm fine. How are you really doing? Are you going to listen? Are you going to push? And some of you have really hard jobs, and you do have to push through. You don't get the luxury of saying in the middle of something, you know what? I'm feeling really kind of tired and stressed. I just need to go. Well, someone's bleeding out in front of you, right? Like you don't really get that option, so I get that. But after your shift, how is it? Or whatever your job is. What is your body telling you? Are you preparing internally? This is the preparation for rest, right? And then ask yourself, what do you find restful? You need to give that some thought. We often don't. We just, not working is restful. And you're like, true. But not always, because your kids or your spouse or other things will come in and say, oh yeah, you know what? I need to get up to Costco for that. Oh, you know what? I got to get over here and do this. Oh, you know what? Yeah. Now, if trips to Costco are restful, by all means, plan that as your rest. But I want us to also differentiate between the day off, where you got to get things done, and things that are restful, right? So we're talking about preparation internally and then now also externally. You all know a restful vacation needs planning, right? The right combination of flexibility and structure. But if you don't plan very well, the vacation doesn't go very well, does it? You're like, oh, I probably should have planned that a little better. We're planning a sabbatical for this summer. And we have to think ahead about what is this going to need for here in the church? What are we going to need to do as a family? And as our kids get older, things change. You have to accommodate differently for that. And then working on even a routine, working on routines that serve us. What are some of the routines that you can implement in your life that really serve you? And some of you have these already. It might be routines with exercise. It might be like every morning I get up at this time, I eat this breakfast, I have this cup of coffee, I read this, and I go then. And that routine can help you actually find rest because you don't have to think about what to do next. It's a routine. So routines can help us, especially when they're born out of our values and we're intentional about what to do with our families. So, lastly, I want to equip you with this tool. This is called the Life-Giving List. It's a tool from a pastor in Colorado, and there's copies on the welcome desk. The Life-Giving List. Look, I understand that for many of us, we can't just, even in our schedules, even if we wanted to say, I'm going to set aside this day as my Sabbath every week. Many of us can't do that, even if you wanted to. But that doesn't mean you can't find rest or rest anywhere. I also understand that you might need to work at it to get better at it, to be able to find rest in ways that you need. And so this is a great little tool from the pastor named Steve Cuss. And it's a life-giving list. And so what it encourages you to do is that has columns on here, and it says, make a list of options that take everything from a few minutes to several days. So it could be maybe it takes you a couple of minutes to do it. Like you say, life-giving for me is a really good cup of coffee and quiet in my favorite chair. So you're really specific, time, location, everything. Or a cup of tea, or whatever it is. Or it could be, I love when my wife and I get away for our anniversary and we go to Banff and we have time alone together for those 3 days. Or I have a bucket list thing and I love Venice, Italy, and we've been once and I'd love to go back for a week. And it was amazing. Whatever it might be, but it could be 5 minutes, could be an afternoon, could be a day, it could be a week, a month, all sorts of, and then as this list grows, you keep adding to it. For me, one of them was a motorcycle ride. That could vary. I'd say an hour to a half day or a whole day. But to get out, man, that was just life-giving for me. I sold my bike, which is unfortunate, but that was one thing I identified as really restful. Something that gives me life and renews me. And so that's this, the purpose of this list. And it has some categories for you to factor in. And if you can begin to do this concrete, to write down some things that you find restful, I think it will begin to change your life. You're going to do some prep. This is preparation for good rest. And when you find yourself with a little bit of time on the horizon, you pull out your list and say, I only have 5 minutes, but I know that I get life from that good cup of coffee. Or I only have a half an hour, or I only have a half day, or I know that this day off is coming up, and I'm going to do that. I'm going to rest. I'm going to enjoy God while I do this. Because God has made coffee to be enjoyed. You might know what I like. But I would encourage you to pick up a copy of this. If we run out, let me know. I can email it to you, print out more, whatever. But it's just a practical tool that I want you to be able to take away. And not try to aim to have a week off or a day off every week just like they did in the Old Testament. That's not what I'm calling us to. If you can grow into that point, fantastic. I think that would change your life. I'm not there yet either. But I am learning and growing and making this list and trying to find these things so that with a little bit of preparation, I can find Sabbath moments, Sabbath afternoons, Sabbath days or weeks with this little bit of prep. Ask the Lord for rest. Ask for His guidance in this as you develop this list and this plan. Remember, Paul writes in the Philippians to not be anxious about anything, but in everything, in prayer and supplication and thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. Maybe you need to ask God for rest. The promise responds to that, says, the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts. It will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. Friends, rest is so important. We cannot neglect it except to our own detriment and to the detriment of community and our relationship with God. Remember, God does not love you for what you can do for Him, but who you are to Him. God does not love you for what you can do for Him, but for who you are, His beloved child. Let's pray.